Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, the two co-creators of arguably the best Marvel character, Spider-Man. Not to pull a Chris Stuckman, but I grew up with the character. However, I didn't start reading the comics until a little bit before I started high school. This was back in 2012 before the release of The Amazing Spider-Man. There was a good amount of hype for the movie and the game, so as a Walmart exclusive, they were selling a behind-the-scenes DVD that had an exclusive sneak peek of the movie, a behind-the-scenes for the video game, and a copy of The Amazing Spider-Man number 6, the first appearance of the Lizard. That actually ended up being my first ever comic book. From there on, I got a chance to read even more thanks to the in-game comic reader in the Amazing Spider-Man video game, which included quite a few comics from the Lee Ditko run. And ever since then, I've been reading comics. However, since then, I never really went back and read the original run. Besides a couple of moments from their work, the Lee Ditko run isn't talked about all that much. It barely even comes up when people recommend Spider-Man comics. I decided to give them another read, and I was blown away at how much these comics paved the way for how we see the character today. It's not something like the early Batman comics, where the character feels like a completely different person today. So, just how good is the original 60s Spider-Man run, and would I recommend this to a new reader? My name is Jaan from the Phenomenal Bunch, and let's get right into it, the truly amazing Lee Ditko Spider-Man run. Parker luck is one of the most important aspects of the character. It's what makes Spider-Man so relatable, and this run set the foundation for what it is. Basically, anything Peter Parker wants is cancelled out by what he has to do as Spider-Man, or vice versa. This is a mantra for every issue and is the backbone for any Spider-Man story. It also sets Spider-Man apart from bigger heroes like Thor or Iron Man. He isn't fighting gods or going to space in these early issues. Instead, he's fighting crime, wasting time, and trying to make a dime. Some of the funniest aspects of the original run is when Peter is put in these smaller street-level situations. Most of these situations feel like something that can happen to anyone, and it just makes the character so relatable. One of my favorite moments in the entire run is when Spider-Man tries to join the Fantastic Four under the impression that they pay well. He heads to the Baxter Building only to fight them, learn that they are non-profit, and angrily leave. I won't spoil too many of these low on cash moments, but I will point out a couple of them. There's a point in this run where Spider-Man tries to sell his web fluid, but his offer is refused because his web dissolves after a few hours. Also, he tries to get trading cards made in his image, but his mixed public reception leads to yet another denial. Although these specific moments are there for laughs, there are plenty of tragic consequences to being Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Obviously, Uncle Ben is the epitome of those consequences. Uncle Ben never says, "With great power comes great responsibility" in Amazing Fantasy 15, but those words always ring true throughout the run. Another moment, for example, is the locked door between Peter Parker and Betty Brant. The early comics were adamant that Peter shouldn't take his mask off every 5 seconds, so he never really gets close to anyone. One of the most beautifully illustrated panels in this run is this one right here, where Spider-Man is portrayed as a literal barrier to Betty and Peter fully committing to their relationship. And now let's get into the second half of Parker luck. The idea that the small victories are what really matter. No matter what is happening to Peter, no matter how bad or how ridiculous, he always finds a way to overcome these odds or just find moments of happiness. This can include going to watch a movie with Aunt May, getting a check from Jonah to pay rent, finding a crafty way to win a fight, and many more. So, this run does a truly amazing job at giving us the core of the Wallcrawler stories. But how are the characters and the writing? Let's get right into it. This run was written back in the 60s, so some of the dialogue is pretty dated. However, a lot of Stan Lee's dialogue, especially Spider-Man's quips, got a chuckle out of me. Also, the rivalry between Flash Thompson and Puny Parker made for some of the funniest moments of these issues. Flash Thompson is in fact one of my favorite characters here, along with good old J. Jonah Jameson, who's written exactly as you might expect. One of my favorite issues is about when Peter is challenged to a boxing match by Flash and the chaos that ensues when an evil robot invades the high school looking for Spider-Man. Just from that description you get an idea of how goofy some of these issues were. But characters like Flash, Triple J, and Human Torch make them more interesting. I also love the way Peter is written here. He is written to be more mature than his classmates, and he can't seem to get along with any of them. Because of this, he doesn't really have any friends at all. I have two separate thoughts on this. On one hand, it makes the issues feel repetitive. This creates an over-reliance on thought bubbles where he constantly talks about his bad luck.
On the other hand, this does make Peter feel more relatable because it invokes the feeling of being afraid to share your problems with people you don't seem to be close enough with. Also, this makes it so that no matter how difficult the situation, Peter's able to solve his problems on his own without someone telling him exactly what to do over an earpiece. I love the way Peter's smarts are highlighted here. I even love that Peter can not only make scientific concoctions, but web weapons as well. We've only seen this in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which is really unfortunate. I know web grenades make more sense than whatever this is, but still. The idea of Peter not having anyone to talk to extends to Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy as well. Osborn and Stacy are usually written as close friends to Peter now, but in the first 38 issues of this run, Peter is too involved with Aunt May's health and new villains popping up, so he ignores them. This causes Gwen and Harry to dislike him. Peter doesn't start to build a connection with Harry until the issue right after Steve Ditko left, and sometime later Peter would develop a relationship with Gwen Stacy. Speaking of, as you might expect for a comic series written during this time, she isn't written very well. She is only interested in Peter because she feels like he is the first guy to not go crazy for her. I mentioned Betty Brant earlier in the video, and I will say that she and Liz Allen are probably my least favorite characters in this run. It all comes down to the way they are written. They are written as characters who only think about if Peter loves them or not. This goes back to Peter not having a friend circle of interesting characters. Since the issues focus more on Peter's struggles and Spider-Man's battles, we don't learn much about anyone else. That isn't a big deal considering who the intended audience was for these comics at the time, but it is a little annoying when they are on the page. I will say though the teases of Mary Jane were pretty fun, as her face is always obstructed by foliage. Every character knows how she looks, except for Peter, who always tries to avoid a blind date. And lastly, the villains are extremely cheesy, but really fun. Spider-Man has a great rogues gallery, and the majority of them are introduced here. Alright, so I've talked about Parker Luck, the writing, and the characters. However, what most people may not know is everything I've talked about isn't exclusive to Stan Lee. Let's get right into Steve Ditko's contributions to the character, because he did a lot more than you might think.
Let's talk about the robust drawer, the powerful artist, the delirious delight, the boast of Marvel, and the painstaking plotter himself, Steve Ditko. I've always been a big fan of Steve Ditko's artwork. In fact, he is one of my favorite comic book artists in general, and probably my favorite Spider-Man artist. He doesn't make Spider-Man look too buff or too skinny, and he looked completely different from the heroes of that time, which is one of the reasons why his design was chosen over Jack Kirby's. Additionally, I loved how he poses the characters in various panels, especially Spider-Man. It makes Peter look more, dare I say, like a human spider. Some panels in here blew my mind because of how gorgeous they were. There are some fun ones in the Doctor Strange issue, and as I mentioned before, the locked door panel is beautiful. It captures the idea behind Peter Parker's wants and needs in one panel. Also, considering that the majority of Spider-Man's rogues gallery is created here, Ditko is largely responsible for the iconic designs of these characters as well. So, Steve Ditko had a big hand in how these characters should look, but what most people don't know is that Ditko actually came up with the plot for many of these issues, and Stan Lee would just add dialogue. Stan would only give him a basic outline of what he wanted to happen, and Ditko would go on to make that outline into a full story with action. He did not receive credit for doing so until issue number 26, where Stan Lee finally put painstakingly plotted by Steve Ditko. It's really unfortunate that people only consider Ditko to be the artist of the run, when he was much more than that. I feel like he had an equal part in crafting the character into what he is today. I'm definitely not taking any credit away from Lee, but more people should know about Ditko's contributions to Spider-Man. Now, allow me to answer the big question. Would I recommend this run to a new reader?
If you haven't read these comics, or from what you've heard me say, have no interest in checking them out, that's completely fine. I know several people will bring up the Ultimate Comics as the better and more modern version of what the early comics try to do, but in my opinion, I've never been the biggest fan of the Ultimate Comics, and that might just be because I was introduced to the 60s comics first. I understand it's just preference. But let me explain why I recommend the Lee Ditko run. Spider-Man is such a popular character with all kinds of games, movies, comics, and more, so it is hard to find a good place to start. The cool thing about Spider-Man though is that a lot of the character's values and struggles aren't all that different now than they were back then. There have been plenty of changes to the character over the years, sure, but while reading the run, it was nice to see the origins of what I love about Spider-Man. So if you are interested in reading Spider-Man comics, there are plenty of comics that you can add to your list like Kraven's Last Hunt, Spider-Man Blue, The Ultimate Comics, and more. However, I would make sure that the Lee Ditko run is on there as well. You'll learn a lot about how key components of the Spider-Man lore was created, and you might even appreciate the character more. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys made it this far, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel to see more. Also, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Spider-Man run that I talked about in this video in the comment section down below. It was really fun rereading these original comics and talking about it with you guys, so I would love to hear what you guys think. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.